Darren adjusted the collar of his uniform for what felt like the 100th time and glanced around the orbiting terminal of Orbis Prime, a place that smelled faintly of ozone, recycled coffee, and something metallic that probably came from the hull of a passing freighter. He had never been good at waiting, and waiting to meet an alien diplomat he couldn't quite predict made him even worse. His palms itched, his stomach did that nervous fluttering thing, and he kept imagining all the ways he could accidentally insult an entire species, like forgetting to bow or, worse, laughing at the wrong time. The terminal was alive with movement. Travelers whose skin shimmered like liquid silver, vendors peddling holographic snacks that promised 100% authentic taste of a planet you've never heard of, and maintenance droids that zipped past, occasionally tripping over one another in ways that looked almost deliberate, as if they were secretly amused. Darren tried to focus on something simple: breathe, stay polite, and don't drool on the protocol manual. Then she arrived. Liara. She stepped off a sleek shuttle that looked more like a floating blade than a vehicle, her long ears twitching ever so slightly as though tuned to a frequency Darren couldn't hear. She could have passed for human if it weren't for those ears, sharp and expressive, catching every detail of the room with a faint, comical curiosity. She wore a robe that shimmered faintly, the color of moonlight just before dawn, and she carried herself with the sort of casual confidence that made everyone around her seem like they were part of the furniture. Darren swallowed and waved like an idiot, imagining that in a more competent universe, someone might have taught him the proper greeting for a long-eared alien diplomat. Human, she said, her voice smooth, musical, but with a hint of amusement. I assume you are here to ask the difficult question. She didn't smile exactly, but the twitch of her ears and the faint curl of one corner of her mouth suggested that she found something in Darren's expression entertaining. Yes, Darren stammered. That is, I mean, yes, I am here to, negotiate. He felt like he was auditioning for a very specific role in a play he hadn't read. Liara tilted her head, a motion so graceful it seemed to defy gravity, and regarded him with her violet eyes. Negotiate? She repeated, as if the word itself were a riddle. Ah, humans, always so dramatic. You make a habit of complicating simple matters. I try not to, Darren said. Then he immediately regretted it. Who even says that? She leaned back on a hovering chair that seemed to float with no visible support and took a sip from a cup that shimmered with iridescent liquid. You are earnest, she said finally, and easily startled. I think I will enjoy this conversation. Darren's heart thumped. Was that a compliment? A threat? He wasn't sure, but he decided to smile anyway because smiling seemed like the safest option in the absence of a proper intergalactic handbook. The terminal's intercom buzzed, announcing the imminent departure of a shuttle carrying a cargo of bioluminescent frogs from the next sector. Liara's ears twitched again. Curious creatures, she murmured. Humans seem to have an unending fascination with amphibians. Why? Darren said, because they're cute. He realized immediately that he sounded like a fool. Liara's eyes glimmered, not with judgment, but with amusement that made him squirm in his boots. Cute, she repeated, the word rolling off her tongue like a melody she was enjoying. Humans and their curious priorities, very well, we shall begin with this earnestness intact then. Lead the way. They moved toward the designated negotiation chamber, a corridor lined with panels that shifted color like living opals. Darren, despite the oddity of the walls and the flickering holograms of alien wildlife, couldn't help noticing that Liara seemed perfectly at ease. In fact, she occasionally waved at passing figures, exchanging greetings in languages Darren couldn't recognize, punctuating her gestures with small jokes that made him chuckle nervously. At one point, she mimed tripping over a maintenance droid, pretending to curse it in a way that made Darren snort with laughter. He tried not to draw attention to himself, but she noticed anyway. You laugh too easily, she said, her ears flicking at him like radar dishes. I hope you will not laugh when the serious part begins, or perhaps that is exactly what I hope. By the time they reached the chamber, Darren's nerves had settled into a mild, jittery excitement. The room itself was impressive. A circular space with a floor that responded to their steps, producing a soft glow under their feet, and walls that displayed live star maps stretching into infinity. Liara moved to the center, floated her hands slightly above a console, and said, Now, human, ask your question. The one that everyone imagines is simple. The one that humans always imagine should be answered with a yes or a no. Darren cleared his throat. Yes, I mean the alliance. Would you? He stopped, realizing that even the words yes and no felt inadequate in the presence of someone who could probably see right through them. Liara's ears twitched in perfect rhythm, almost like a metronome for his panic. Would I what? She asked, her voice calm, teasing. Would I agree? Would I join your alliance? Or are you asking me to dance a jig while making a solemn promise? I just want a clear answer, Darren said. Yes or no, that's all simple, right? Liara paused, then let out a sound that could have been a laugh or a hum, somewhere between a musical note and a gentle chime. Simple, she echoed. Oh, human, simple is an illusion. She gestured around the room, and the star map shifted to show a dozen galaxies with arrows and lines connecting them in a way that made Darren's head spin. You see, the universe is not simple, negotiation is never simple, and yet, she leaned forward, eyes glimmering. I rather like your earnestness, it makes the game amusing. Darren couldn't help it, he laughed. It was a nervous, awkward sound, but it startled even him, echoing off the glowing walls. Liara's ears twitched like they were applauding, and she said, Yes, I will answer, but not in the way you expect. Not yet. The universe human prefers surprises. He stared at her, heart pounding, not sure whether to feel relieved, terrified, or entirely foolish. But before he could formulate another question, she stood, motioned to the holographic console, and said, Let us begin with something more entertaining than bureaucracy. I have something to show you. The console shimmered and then projected a tiny, dancing robot with 4 legs, wearing a minuscule space helmet. It waved at Darren, spun in a pirouette, and then launched a glittery projectile into the air that rained down like a tiny meteor shower. Darren stumbled backward, laughing so hard he nearly fell, and Liara's long ears twitched in perfect synchronization with the sparkling chaos. You see, human, she said, as if reading his mind, the universe has a sense of humor. You should get used to it, for it will follow you even into the gravest negotiations. Darren wiped tears from his eyes, trying to regain composure. I think I can manage, he said, though his voice was shaky with laughter. Liara's eyes glinted like stars in response, and for a moment, the tension that had clawed at him since he arrived evaporated entirely. She floated closer, her presence calming yet teasing. Remember this, human, she said softly, even the most serious questions deserve a little levity. Perhaps when you are ready, you will find your yes or no hidden somewhere in the laughter. Darren nodded, unsure if he fully understood, but certain of one thing. His expectation of a simple answer had already been completely overturned. And somehow he felt exactly where he was supposed to be, even if he didn't know what would happen next. Darren followed Liara aboard her starcruiser, a sleek vessel that hummed like a living creature, its hull reflecting the light of nearby nebulae in colors that seemed impossible. She moved with the confidence of someone who had piloted through asteroid storms, supernova shockwaves, and bureaucratic nightmares all before breakfast, while Darren felt like he might need a full day just to remember which buttons to press. The corridors of the ship were narrow but alive, panels shifting colors and rearranging themselves as if the ship itself were amused by their presence. You humans always seem so tense, Liara said, noticing his stiff posture. Do you not trust that your feet will stay on the floor? I just don't want to accidentally trigger something, Darren said. He almost tripped over a small maintenance droid that zoomed past, squawking a warning in several languages. Liara laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a solar breeze. Accidents are educational, she said, and sometimes entertaining, but mostly educational. She flicked a switch and the corridor floor became slightly elastic, bouncing Darren forward with each step. Try that, she said with a smirk. Darren stumbled and nearly collided with her, but she caught his elbow with a touch that was light as a feather. Careful, human, she teased. One more stumble and I will start charging you for ship repairs. Darren laughed despite himself, realizing that she could make even danger feel like a joke. They entered the cockpit where stars stretched endlessly outside the transparent walls. Liara's hands hovered above controls that seemed more like art than technology, glowing lines and symbols dancing under her fingers. Relax, she said. I've piloted through worse than asteroid storms. Before Darren could reply, the ship shuddered. Ah, perfect timing, Liara said with a grin. A cluster of asteroids swarmed them, spinning unpredictably. She twisted the controls in ways that made Darren's stomach lurch, flipping the ship upside down mid-maneuver. I hope your stomach is stronger than your negotiating skills, she said. I think I'll survive, Darren said, though his voice was shaky, and he gripped the armrest as the stars outside twisted in impossible directions. Liara's long ears twitched, catching his nervous breaths like musical notes. Good, she said. It would be awkward if I had to explain to your superiors why a human diplomat was ejected into space for laughing at my piloting. Once past the asteroids, the ship returned to calm, and Darren exhaled with relief. Liara leaned back, her violet eyes twinkling with amusement. You humans have a fascinating relationship with fear, she said. You panic, yet you laugh, sometimes simultaneously. I find it endearing. Darren managed a weak smile. I think I laugh to convince myself I'm not going to die. Liara's ears flicked and she tilted her head. Practical and entertaining, good combination. They passed through a field of luminous particles that clung to the ship's hull, creating trails of sparkling light. Liara casually extended a hand and the particles responded, forming patterns that resembled dancing constellations. Try touching them, she said. Darren hesitated, then reached out. The particles swirled around his fingers, tickling like a gentle wind. This universe has a sense of humor too, Liara said. Sometimes it tickles. Darren laughed, almost losing his balance again, but she steadied him with an effortless movement. Hours passed in this strange rhythm, Liara piloting through regions of space that seemed to exist only in dreams and calculations humans weren't meant to understand. Darren learned quickly that humor was her way of teaching, of communicating, and perhaps of gauging him. At one point, she conjured a holographic map showing dozens of interstellar governments, trade routes, and hidden wormholes. Now, she said, see how your so-called simple yes or no decision could ripple across hundreds of star systems? Darren squinted at the dizzying display, feeling his head spin. I guess I never thought of it like that. Liara's long ears twitched. You humans are amusingly literal. Everything is black and white until someone with perspective shows you the shades of violet. Darren chuckled at the unintended pun and she shot him a sly glance. Ah, humor, finally you understand something correctly. That was impressive, human. As they drifted through a nebula that glowed in emerald and gold, a minor emergency alarm sounded. Darren stiffened, expecting catastrophe. Liara, however, simply raised an eyebrow. Oh, nothing to worry about. She tapped a control and a small robot zipped out, carrying a container of stabilizing ions that hummed quietly as it floated into place. You worry too much, she said. It's like watching a child panic over a broken teacup while the tea is still perfectly drinkable. Darren laughed, realizing she had a point. Later, as they cruised through a corridor of floating asteroids, Liara produced a tiny holographic critter, no larger than Darren's hand, that began to dance, spin, and emit glittering sparks. I thought you might need a distraction, she said, her voice teasing. Darren swatted at the sparkling air, laughing, and the critter pirouetted around his head. This is ridiculous, he said between laughs. Ridiculously fun, Liara corrected. By the time they arrived at a quiet sector for refueling, Darren's nerves had relaxed into a kind of amused awe. Liara floated beside him, observing him with an expression that was almost maternal but also mischievous. You see, human, the universe prefers play over panic, she said. And sometimes the answers you seek aren't found in seriousness, but in how you respond to nonsense. Darren nodded, wiping a tear from laughter and thinking that she might be right. Here he had expected a simple negotiation, a single word, a yes or no, and instead he had been piloted through asteroid fields, tickled by luminous particles, laughed at by holographic creatures, and taught lessons about perspective and humor in the same breath. He realized that any answer Liara gave would be impossible to separate from her unpredictable nature, and that was, somehow, exactly what made him want it more. Liara's ears twitched once more as if sensing his thoughts, and she floated closer. Tomorrow, she said, we discuss alliances in earnest, but tonight you must rest. Even humans can benefit from a bit of interstellar nonsense before serious matters. Darren nodded, feeling a strange sense of gratitude for the chaos she brought. Humor, unpredictability, and a violetide alien with long ears had transformed a simple task into an experience he would never forget. As he settled into a small cabin that seemed to mold itself to his shape, Darren reflected on the day. The universe was vast, dangerous, and absurd, and he was entirely unprepared, but somehow that was exactly the point. Liara had made him see that survival, negotiation, and perhaps even connection depended not on control, but on embracing the unexpected. And somewhere deep in his chest, a spark of excitement flared because he had no idea what surprise she would throw at him next. And for the first time, that uncertainty felt exhilarating instead of terrifying. The moon hung low over the phosphorescent ice seas, casting a glow that made Darren's reflection flicker like a fragmented hologram. Liara piloted the starcruiser down toward a secluded landing platform, her long ears twitching as though catching some cosmic joke that only she could hear. "Welcome to my little corner of the universe," she said, voice light and teasing. "Where alliances are considered, negotiations are optional, and gravity has a sense of humor." Darren frowned at the ladder, glancing at the floor as it shifted slightly beneath his boots. "Gravity's sense of humor?" he asked. She just grinned, and he decided not to press it. The chamber she led him into was circular, walls alive with shimmering constellations that responded to their movements. It felt intimate and infinite at once, a place where space and time seemed to fold around them. Liara's eyes glimmered, violet and unreadable, as she floated to the center. "Human," she said, "today we resolve the question you came with, but not as you imagined." Darren's pulse quickened. He had spent days wondering how a simple yes or no could be twisted into a cosmic riddle, but Liara had a way of making even the most direct human desires feel like children lost in a star field. He took a deep breath. "So, do you accept the alliance?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Yes or no?" Liara tilted her head, her long ears flicking in perfect rhythm. "Ah, simple words. I will answer them, but first—" She raised her hands, and the floor beneath Darren rippled like liquid, throwing him slightly off balance. "A demonstration," she declared. The walls lit up with holographic projections, showing planets spinning, fleets maneuvering, and trade routes weaving intricate patterns across galaxies. "See this, human? This is the universe responding to your so-called simple decision. Alliances are never a straight line. They ripple, loop, and collide in ways your species can barely imagine." Darren's head spun as he tried to follow the paths of stars and ships, but Liara was already chuckling at his expression. "You know," she said, floating closer, "it would be perfectly reasonable to panic. I think humans invented panic for moments like this." Darren laughed nervously. Well, yes, but I've been learning," he admitted. "I've been laughing instead?" She twitched her ears, a sign he now understood meant approval. She waved her hand, and a small robotic critter zipped out from a corner, performing a clumsy pirouette before spraying glitter into the air. "Even in the gravest matters, a little nonsense helps perspective," Liara said. Darren swatted at the sparkles, smiling, feeling the tension melt away. "I think I finally get it," he said. "It's about adapting." "Exactly," she replied. "You humans often look for straight paths, straight answers, but the universe is anything but straight." She paused, letting the stars dance around them like spectators to their conversation. "So here is your answer." She extended her hands, and the holograms coalesced into a single image. A new set of trade agreements, security protocols, and cultural exchanges that Darren hadn't even imagined suggesting. It wasn't a simple yes, and it wasn't a simple no. It was a solution that benefited both species, one that required creativity, trust, and yes, a willingness to embrace unpredictability. "This," she said, "is my yes, human. Not the one you expected, but one that will last. Now, do you understand why I enjoy surprises?" Darren stared at the projection, feeling a rush of relief and admiration. "It's brilliant," he admitted, his voice low. I never would have thought of this." Liara's ears flicked in what Darren had learned was a smile. "And that, human, is why you will survive interstellar politics. Because you learn to laugh, to adapt, and to see the humor where others see only danger." The rest of the day passed in a series of smaller lessons. Navigating a holographic puzzle that simulated interstellar trade disputes, avoiding a minor gravity fluctuation that sent Darren floating upside down while Liara sipped her iridescent tea, and laughing at the antics of a tiny robotic monkey that tried and failed every trick in the protocol manual. By the time night fell over the moon, Darren felt a strange combination of exhaustion and exhilaration, a human mind stretched by experiences he hadn't even known were possible. When they finally sat together on the observation deck, the moon casting its light across ice seas that glowed with bioluminescent colors, Darren realized how much he had changed. He was no longer the anxious diplomat who had stumbled through Orbis Prime, hoping for a simple answer. He had learned that the universe was unpredictable, that humor could be a weapon and a shield, and that some answers were found not in certainty, but in the willingness to embrace the unexpected. Liara floated beside him, her long ears brushing the soft light, and said, "You have done well, human. Not because you asked the right questions, but because you learned to